Our friend Al-Kadour has set the tone courageously for our debate, and as he said, to reason we must add love and conviction, and the topics which are before us today should be analyzed from that point of view. So I would invite all participants to make their comments or ask questions at this time on the various presentations we've heard this afternoon. We'll collect observations and questions from the audience, and then we'll give the floor to the panelists to respond. I'd like to ask those present here who will be speaking to please identify yourselves. And unfortunately, I have the not very nice role to play of having to set time limits. I see Mr. Chavez is asking for the floor. And then, if you could help me put some order to the requests. You have the floor, Mr. Chavez. Thank you. I'll be speaking in English. I apologize because my portuñol is not very good yet.
I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to open this debate. And before I address my comments and questions, I would like to share first congratulations for the organizers for on this table having 2 women speaking. I think that's a very important issue, and before the conference was lacking a gender balance, and for the first time I have 2 women speaking. And on the other hand, I have some constructive criticism that I would like to share on this table, that I was expecting to hear a lot of experiences regarding civil society. Unfortunately, we had only 2. That is the academic experience that Arlene commented a bit, and from the other 3 speakers, we had the same experience with Consenso por la Paz. So maybe for the next conference, we could think about inviting more groups. I would be happy to share a lot of contacts in civil society in Latin America that are dealing in different ways with the Palestinian question. To Mr. Kaufman, I saw during your presentation some references to the Hebrew University and also to the Jewish National Fund. I believe we don't need to discuss the Jewish National Fund. That's a very consensus thing, that it has been one of the agencies responsible for the colonization of the West Bank. But I would like to ask you about the Israeli universities. I'm going to read a quote for Desmond Tutu, the very well-known Archbishop from South Africa, fighter against apartheid, and today very much engaged in the Palestinian struggle. I quote, "It cannot be business as usual. Israeli universities are intimately part of the Israeli regime by active choice. They produce research, technology, and arguments for the leaders to keep the occupation." That was said when the Johannesburg University decided to stop all kinds of cooperation with all Israeli universities, those inside Israel and those in the occupied territories, such as Ariel University. Many Israeli academics have been supporting the academic boycott of the institutions, not the individuals, as yourself. I'm pleased to be talking to you. But academics such as Nurit Pillay, Ilan Pap, Jeff Halper, San Shlomo, and many others have been stating, please invite me, but not my institution, to talk. So I would like to hear from you your inputs on the responsibility of Israeli universities in the general framework of human rights violations, not only the occupation. To Professor Arlene, I would like to hear from you as a Brazilian, and every time in our international conferences we hear a lot of good things about Brazil. And it seems Brazil is like this heaven where human rights have been fulfilled, and we have the race equality and this myth that we don't have racism and that black people have the same rights as white people in our country, and that's, of course, that's a myth. And unfortunately, with Palestine, it's the same. We have a lot of good initiatives from our government, but we also, I'm ashamed to say that Brazil is the biggest contractor with military industry, the Israeli military industry in South America, and the second in the world. So how can you be against occupation and against the human rights violations perpetrated by the State of Israel while you are actively financing the industry that keeps it going? And my second question to Ms. Arlene is, yesterday I asked for us to consider other things besides the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. And I come to that again regarding the Palestinians inside Israel and the refugees outside the historical Palestine. What has been the reason for many to call this whole situation not a conflict, but a very similar situation as what we have typified under international law to an apartheid regime. Would you comment on this definition? To Ms. Volkovich, is that right? My pronunciation? Okay. So, I'm a Brazilian white middle-class man, and my whole life I have faced no oppression at all in my country. I'm white and I'm a man, and I come from middle class. The first time I was discriminated in my whole life when I was working in Palestine, and I couldn't go from the village where I was stationed directly to Nablus because that was a Jewish-only road. So I had to go down to a junction and wait for a bus only for Palestinians. And I was waiting for this bus, and then it started raining, and I had to go to this bus stop, the settler bus stop. And then the soldier came to me and asked if I was Jew. And I said, no, I don't have any religion. And then he asked me to leave the settler bus stop. I'm saying this because I believe there are limits for this closeness that you claim in this Primo's perspective, because there's a limit for us. Me, for example, I cannot acknowledge any oppression that you, as a woman, maybe have been facing in your life, and maybe you, as a non-Palestinian, will not be able ever to acknowledge what is to be oppressed. So what are the limits for you to be so close, for you to be cousins, primos? My second question, I got the impression that you assume that all Jews around the world are somehow connected to Israel. I have many Jewish friends that don't have any connections to the state of Israel. So why do we have to assume, and for that reason work with the Jewish diaspora around the world, that most of them has never been in Israel before, that they have some kind of connection with Israel? Shouldn't we treat the diasporas or the people that has no religion equally in this matter, since it is a general matter? To Mr. Al-Kadour, as I told you, I have never faced any kind of oppression, and in Brazil nobody sees me as with an Arab face or with any kind of face. They just see me as a Brazilian. When I was in Israel and Palestine, in Israel people would ask me if I was Israeli, and in Palestine they would ask me if I was Palestinian or Lebanese or whatever. I'm saying this because you mentioned that you have the name and the face of an Arab, and I couldn't, when I was working as a human rights observer in Palestine, I couldn't distinguish many times who was a settler and who was a Palestinian, because they just look the same. You can have Jewish Arab Jews, you can have Palestinians with blue eyes and white skin, and why we still keep doing these distinctions between Jews and Palestinians, between Arabs and Jews, in a racial basis? I'm a bit worried about this kind of classifications. About love, I do believe everything in the world is moved by the willing of having a better life and love. But on this matter, I prefer to stick with international law sometimes and not recall religious texts, because I don't want to face the Palestinian situation as a religious conflict, because that's not the case. But I agree that love is a very important thing, and I would like to mention the case of the Palestinians who are forbidden to live with their loved ones because of the citizenship law that forbids Palestinians from Haifa, for example, to live with their wives or husbands from the West Bank, and also forbids Palestinians to marry Jew Israelis in the same perspective. So how can we talk about love if we have what I call a very segregated regime and two sets of law to different people? And so how is that, how we can have love under this situation? Thank you.
Muchas gracias, señor Charbel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Charbel. We'll take questions or short comments from the distinguished delegates who've raised their hands. And after a first round, we'll have some answers. If everyone agrees to that, your questions are very complete. I don't want this to end up becoming a second conference, awakening other interests. So we will, of course, analyze your very interesting questions. Dr. Rivadeneira has the floor, and then distinguished colleague in the back will answer, and then I'll go to the ambassador of Palestine and the distinguished representative of Brazil. That's the order in which we'll take comments. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am Ivan Rivadeneira, Secretary General of the American Association of Legal Experts. It's a continental organization for human rights. It's based on solidarity with peoples, and it has an advisory status in the United Nations. I'm Ecuadorian, and I'm very pleased that we're here in this meeting, here in Quito. And I'm pleased that from here we can express everything that we feel about this conflict which has lasted for so long. As the chairman indicated, I'd like to be specific about my concern. It seems to me that the panel, generally speaking, referred to one or several aspects of the issue which very much relates to the idea of linking the possibility of peace and settlement of a dispute through an effort based on consensus, and that there's support for the possibility of people, the peoples being the ones that express themselves in all possible dimensions. And that would include an effort being made for official entities to take into account the spirit of the people, the desire of the people, the consensus and solidarity of the people. I think we would all agree with that situation, and we should support it in every way possible. But what's happening is that here, in these 2 days of conference or meeting, no one has touched upon one aspect which, in one way or another, does arise in the various presentations, even if it's in a small way, and that's the specific topic of the fact that this is not just about finding an agreement between the peoples, which they are working towards, they're getting there. The issue is how to agree with a bellicose regime, a warmongering regime which has the nuclear weapon, a regime which has done everything which has been denounced here. We've been given statistics. The panel gave us a presentation about what is it that happened in the occupied territories, in the invaded lands, what happened in the colonized territories, or those that were settled. And it seems to me that that geopolitical aspect of the issue would be interesting to address. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about how to solve that problem, because it sort of relates more to the spirit of solidarity or fraternity. This is a geopolitical issue. It goes beyond. There is an interest in dominating and imposing a presence for the purposes of dominating and controlling. So that's the question I have. If you could address that geopolitical question. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Rivadeneira. I now give the floor to the distinguished gentleman in the back of the room. If you could come close and find a microphone, please. Dr. Kaufman would like to be able to hear you.
Bueno, hola.
Hello, yes, very well. My name is Sergio Weir. I'm the Director for Latin America of the Simón Vicental Center. I wanted to make a number of comments. We have heard throughout the different plenary sessions numerous arguments that have been very similar. They're focused on channeling the responsibility for lack of peace prospects on the shoulders of Israel, the settlements, the wall, Gaza, the blockade, and not focusing on Hamas terrorism action. It was recently described as a group that was categorized. It was said that they were categorized as terrorists to justify the status quo, when Hamas's constitution calls for the destruction of Israel. It's not an opinion, it's a document. There's also been mention of the fact that Latin America was crucial in '47 when it came to the creation of the State of Israel. And in 2010, with the recognition of Palestine, the reality is that support for the creation of an Arab state neighboring Israel was also voted on in 1947. And it was the Arab world that rejected it. This is part of the truth that has been left out here. 6.5 decades have been lost that cannot be blamed on the State of Israel. We are hearing of civil society organizations and initiatives that are surprising because they are aimed at regulating curricular activities in Jewish schools in Brazil, suggesting that they should incorporate the Nakba vision in order to, quote unquote, help for Jews to know their history. I think that it's clear here that Israel hopes for a peace that would consolidate its status as a Jewish state and providing security to its states. And on this basis, it would be open to bilateral dialogue that would lead to two states living side by side in lasting peace. We also heard of other interesting initiatives tied to UNASUR's possible role. All good faith initiatives are welcome, but I suggest that before UNASUR become involved, two countries that make up UNASUR and that broke off diplomatic relations with Israel unilaterally first reestablish their diplomatic ties. Otherwise, we can't speak of a balanced effort on that front. We also appreciate that there are initiatives in civil society. Our center is hoping for this, and we participate in civil society activities. We have been in fora, such as the World Social Forum, in which unfortunately we had to leave because violence was expressed against the delegation from our center, from the podium. So all civil society efforts that are aimed at dialogue and building onward toward a better future, we're willing to sit at the table. And to conclude, I think that Israel has already shown its willingness to sign on to a lasting peace with neighboring states. It did so with Egypt and Jordan in '94, withdrawing from Gaza in 2005. And I would return to the model from Ambassador Al-Zeben when he made a mention to football. The ball is in the Palestinian court at this point, and we call for fair play toward a lasting peace and a sustained peace between Israelis and Palestinians. Thank you. Thank you very much for your observations on this. I will now give the floor to the panelists. We'll address some and then the rest. We have an order here. I invite the panelists then to respond to the questions that we've heard from the three individuals that have taken the floor, and in whatever order you wish. From the right to left, okay, as long as the right doesn't take too long. Mr. Kaufman, you have the floor, and then we'll move down through the table to the left. Microphone to the speaker, please. Very well. I'll be responding to two of the speakers. I think that coming from Israel and Palestine as well, we are a bit tired of a rhetoric that seems to incriminate one side or the other, as if it were a circle that was bleeding each other. You aren't doing this, but at the same time, some say that there might be truth by commission, but they omit truths of the others. This manner of fighting for a cause, which might be fair, is not something that can lead to coexistence. It really just leads to confrontation. Who's in the right? Who's winning more points? It's really a fight for points that really doesn't work. I'll be more specific in my response to the question from Mr. Charbel. The reason for which I wanted to address the matter of the diaspora is not that there aren't other important aspects, but that it's value added to work with diaspora when we work to peace, because that hasn't been done. There are extreme Jews on the extreme left that I share opinions with. Sometimes I'm very close to them personally, but we have to have a broad front among. If we want to have an impact in the peace process, we have to approach it thus. And in the case of, and there are many Palestinians that are willing to open up discussions with all political parties, including center-right parties. I say this as a comment, I guess, because what I was going to say to you was going to be a bit defensive. When I speak of the diaspora, there is a link with what you were saying. You asked me a question, I'm going to have to answer it. I would have rather have delved deeper into the matter of the diaspora. I had a meeting with a number of individuals, with a Palestinian named Mubarak Awad, and he created in Jerusalem during the first Intifada the Center for Nonviolence, inspired by Gandhi and others. And when this was met with success in Israel, there was some opposition to it because the individual had a U.S. passport, despite the fact that he was born in Jerusalem. He had a blue ID card, but he was still deported. This incredible situation in which the enemy number one of Prime Minister Shamid was the first Palestinian to open a center for nonviolence. And it was just unacceptable. Many people, myself included, protested this. In my personal case, when Mubarak Awad in East Jerusalem in the Mokaviya jail began a hunger strike, I began a hunger strike as well. I did so in the parking lot next to the jail. Each of us on different sides of the same prison wall. I mention this not to show credentials, but there is a civil society that is not just anti-Zionist and all radical, as you perhaps would have wanted that to be. And we're very much against the occupation. The last article that I wrote is a book called The Impact. It's an article, actually. The Impact of the Occupation on Israel. And in my article, I look at the impact of the occupation on human rights in Israel. I'm not even speaking as a former president of my organization. And it is one of the strongest human rights organizations in Israel. But what happens is that the rhetoric of coming here and saying, I have right and you don't. And let me give you an example. Right now we have a project financed by the Norwegians. It's an academic cooperation program. It's an institutional. But there's personal intimidation. And you know what happened in Ramallah? The people that were against the normalization of diplomatic relations broke in, and we spoke with a number of Palestinian professors who were being helped with this with Norway, and they said they're saying we are in favor of the boycott. This is a legitimate tool for nonviolent fight. People like myself, we boycott the settlement products, but we also have a list of the companies working in them, and we shared that list of companies and settlements with academics and other circles that aren't as pro-peace perhaps as we are, and we want them to cease to buy those products. I mention this because, and a bit on the defensive, because with omission you say we're not mentioning the bad things that are happening on the other side, but the Norwegian project says that for there to be academic freedom, we have to first bring an end to occupation. When I say I'm going to cooperate, for example, with a Canadian, or when I'm told I can't, rather, I can't accept that because a Palestinian can have his university closed. I can't. They can't close mine. There's an asymmetry that we have to recognize. What's happening is that in your discourse, you don't recognize that. You don't recognize that element, which is so harmful for the Palestinians. When he says that we don't mention Hamas, I just mentioned Hamas. No, I was referring to what she had said. And she spoke to Hamas. She spoke about Hamas, rather. I was referring to the idea that people have elevated Hamas to the category of terrorists merely to justify the status quo. Well, she can defend herself on that point, but that's what was said. We'll go speaker by speaker so that everyone has the opportunity to explain themselves. What I want to say is that this going around in circles is harmful. You said that in 47, you referred to the partition. It would have been, but what does that have to, why is it important to go back to 47 right now, and we need to look toward the future? And speaking of, I'm secular, but I do respect other opinions, and consensus should incorporate not merely people that have strong religious faith, but also people that have a concept of humanity or humanism. Because I'm also from the left, perhaps we speak very clearly in terms, in class terms. Perhaps that's our language, but there needs to be this coexistence. We're going to lose the last opportunity of this decade to move toward a peace accord if we're not inclusive. Perhaps you could look at a PowerPoint on the geopolitics and the importance of settlements. Perhaps you can speak with him and see that PowerPoint presentation, because I think it was excellently designed and analyzed. My comment for people such as Sergio and you, sir, is that let's not try to score points. Let's work together. We need to look at two states, and look at this from a humanist standpoint. We need to stop fighting against people that are looking for peace now through consensus. Very clear. Madam Clemesha, you have the floor. I appreciate all of the questions. I'll begin over here in this side of the room. I was very happy to be able to speak to the role of Brazil. There's a significant contradiction. South-South cooperation is the fruit of mutual understanding between our countries, and the fruit of a natural trend, an historic trend, toward doing so. There's a long track record of fighting against colonization, of fighting against dehumanization, and it seems like a contradiction to me that a country such as Brazil can have such a fruitful cooperation of promoting Palestinian rights, while at the same time it buys Israeli weapons. The same weapons that are used to maintain the occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. It's a paradox, and it's intolerable. Undoing the system takes hard work. So I'm very happy to see that in my university there is a youth movement, a so well organized youth movement, very much involved in taking a role in discussing and promoting activities that are aimed at breaking down all the links of this paradoxical system. And for me, the only action, the only activity, as I said earlier, and I'd like to say this with more clarity now, the only action that can bring together everyone, all the youth in my university that I see working so hard, and the international community, and because the countries are ever more in need of these efforts, bringing together Israelis and Palestinians that have the same concerns. The only action that can be taken is the election of, is choosing a company and boycotting that company. The youth is much more informed than I am. What company would they choose? But I think it's very necessary. I appreciate the question. On apartheid, I'm going to say the same as I said last year when the youth of my university invited me to address the matter, and I spoke to the matter of apartheid. Despite a low enthusiasm from my colleagues in the Hebrew program, we have the Arab program and a Hebrew program and an Arab program, and it's just one postgraduate program together. And I said, how can you speak in the week of apartheid on this issue? And I said, look. Oh, they also said it was a political act, and I said, look. Speaking together with his professor of biblical history, I said, you know, even more than I do, the giving a biblical history class can be as or more political than speaking to the situation right now because of how it's used. And the same on apartheid. Speaking to the matter cannot be condemned, because if we look at what is happening throughout the region, if one looks at the manner in which 60% of the Palestinians living in the West Bank have never been able to visit Jerusalem. 20% of the Palestinians from the West Bank have never been able to see the ocean, the sea. There are checkpoints blocking the coming and going. Well, it's constantly the case. There's collective punishment. If one looks at how the Palestinians were taken from their houses, many have been eliminated. They have been closed off. They've been sealed into cities with a wall around it. They've been cut off by the walls. If one looks at these situations, if one looks at how intellectuals and the Israeli regime itself justifies, the modern-day Israeli government ever more justifies laws in the Knesset that exclude the rights of the Palestinians in Israel. I'm talking about Arabs with Israeli citizenry. It's really a second-class citizenry. They do not have the right to access all of the things that the Israelis have access to, the non-Arab Israelis. If we look at this, what other word can I use than apartheid? I think it's actually the lightest of words I could use.
I'd love to speak English, but I'm trying to speak Spanish so that you can all understand me. Bueno, entonces es una palabra que no es demasiado.
I don't think the word is too far from the reality. It's a word that fits perfectly well in what's happening. A segregation, a closing off, a discrimination, a division. A Palestinian living in Jerusalem a day after 1967 was going to receive an ID card that said temporary resident of Jerusalem.
¿No? Bueno, algo muy importante que quería decir aquí.
And there's something very important that I wanted to say here.
Sistema que ha levado.
This is a system that has led to people using this comparison with apartheid. And the comparison can be made. There's another important thing. How this matter of casting blame, we see it in all of our discussions and debates in the university. Someone always comes forth to cast blame, and I think it's the role of the professor to give the history and not continue to undertake our academic research with blame casting. And what happened in 47 and 48, and the fact that the Palestinians right now have not been able to leave this context is explained by history. From 36 to 39, the Great Palestinian Uprising was squashed. Many leaders were eliminated. The National Palestinian Movement that had been developing was defeated in 47. And even before the declaration of the State of Israel, which had received opposition from the Arab states that were in the General Assembly, that voted on this. Why? Because of the dynamic that was underway. And when the State of Israel was declared, 400,000 Palestinians had been expelled from their homes. There was already civil war. There was a process. And the Palestinians did not have the institutions because they were fighting for national freedom in a context in which they had to fight on two fronts at the same time: the British occupation and the Zionist movement that had a clear project of creating a state. And this led to the expulsion of so very many Palestinians, 800,000, from the beginning of the civil war in 47 through to the end of the Arab-Israeli war at the end of 49. So history looks at this. I didn't understand the question on Hamas, but I'm going to skip that. I think that for everyone the issue is clear. And with all respect to the speakers, I want to conclude merely by saying that this geopolitical dimension is very much contained in the idea that I tried to explain. Domination and colonization deepen every day in Palestine. And lastly, actually, perhaps I had an additional idea that I wanted to put together perhaps at the very end, but this would be a good time to pass the microphone to one of my colleagues. Just an announcement. I would call upon the speakers to summarize because the bus is going to leave. There is an historic tour to the historic center of Quito. The bus leaves at 7, but we need to have finished. It's been an excellent debate, a rich discussion. So I'm going to try to sum up, and I'm going to respond to the questions asked of me directly. How do we consider ourselves cousins when we hear what happened to you? We consider ourselves to be cousins, and I said this in the beginning. I'm not a politician. I don't work in politics as we understand them in the traditional political venues. I think that civil society has a great deal of room to build. You were pleased to see that there were 2 women in the panel, and that this is new. But this is something that was built. It's progress, and that's what we're looking for. We're looking for this type of thing, and I'm trying to respond to both of your questions. I do not think that all Jews of the world are Zionists. I do not think that all of the Jews of the world are religious. I do not think that all the Jews of the world believe in the Torah and the Talmud, nor do I think that none of them do. There are different ways to feel Jewish. And I think that what brings us together is that in each of our own space as Jews, we want to be unified with our own identities and to be a community even with these differences. I believe very deeply in this cousin relationship. That's what our origins are. I think we have much more in common than we have as differences. I really don't appreciate that they said, please get out of the settlers' bus stop. No. I think that the soldier should have let you be there, but that's part of a policy that I don't agree with. That doesn't mean that I don't believe that Israel is a state that must exist with the same right to exist as the Palestinian state. And I do not think that the Jews of the world, I don't think that all of the Jews of the world are either pro or anti-Israel. I think that one can think of the rights of the Palestinian state, and to do so is not to speak against Israel. And this is the challenge, and that we have to move ahead and face. Thank you.
Permiso, Presidente.
I apologize. I'd like to quickly respond myself, Mr. Chairman.
Clasificaciones. No insistimos. Yo me defino.
With the characteristics I have, no one can say. I'm sorry? I am the son, mother and father Syrian. I am not Palestinian in my background, but I sympathize with the Palestinian cause. And that's why I speak and define myself. I spend 2 months a year traveling. I go to the Palestine, Israel, Holy Land. And they see me, and I've even been able to process it even spiritually, I would say. And that's why I can take it when I have to walk in Palestine or walk in Israel and Holy Land. I prefer that. I prefer to suffer those 3 or 4 hours in the airport or near the wall, but to be in a place where I personally am happy. So let me just define myself. With regard to what you said on international law, Mr. Charva, we've been talking about that for 1.5 years. Now I'm talking about civil society. And what mobilizes me, gets me into action, in addition to all the international action with whether or not it's successful, and which serves as a foundation, but it's not give in to the person that loves, recognize the dignity of the other person as an equal, and not think that one is superior. That is the face of love for me, to give in. With regard to the asymmetries of forces, which are a colleague was talking about, and the greed asymmetry of forces. I think, and I've traveled a lot and had many conversations with diplomats, Palestinian diplomats, Palestinian citizens. Just a couple of weeks ago I was in Ramallah. This, from my point of view, it's the last chance for peace. I don't know if there will be many more chances for peace. We've talked about this with the Palestinian peoples, and that's why we're so active. That concern leads me to get more and more involved, to be creative, to take action. Distinguished Sergio, I'll try and focus on specifics. I don't want to let some things pass, and that is the nature of Palestinian state as a Jewish state. From my point of view, that's what he said. It's the name he used. This is another argument which diminishes peace. Comments made off microphone, the interpreter cannot hear. Well, that says the speaker, is the discussion today. I don't share that vision. It's fine to clarify, but that's not what you said. I apologize for the misinterpretation, but the clarification helps. I am one of those that does not share that view of classifying the state of Israel as a Jewish state, because that's again an argument that undermines peace, and it's trying to erase history, the history of the land, of the peoples. And why are we going through the channel of UNASUR? Because we think that regional action is stronger. There's a common unity, as Mariela was saying. There's common history, common denominators. And we've seen that in the graphs, the community presence in our countries. So what we're doing is looking for leadership. So we go to our ministries, to our governments, and we suggest everything we can, and that's what we're doing. That's what I'm doing. Obviously, it's not the right path for everyone, but for anyone who feels called to do so, they should. That's what we're here for, to share our experiences. And if there's a state that takes that stance, well, then there's leadership behind it. So our presidents need to agree to a space for dialogue and openness. I enjoy the path of agreement. It's not that the day that peace comes, because otherwise the path would be difficult. The path of having my brothers with me, of having a professor who's a constant reference to have professors in Palestine who come here and give lectures, to share a vision with my cousins that peace is possible. That gives me hope. And that's enough for me. I know it doesn't solve the problem, and I know that my brothers in Palestine continue to suffer, and I'm fully aware of that. And I'm fully aware of that. But I live in this region. I ended up in Argentina. And so from where I am, I do what I can. And what I can do is a lot, is a little, I don't know. I offer it, and then God will decide. And that's why I was referring to blessed is he who works for peace. Thank you.
Muchas gracias por la primera ronda.
Thank you for the first round